Welcome, dear viewer, to the cozy realm of movie summary. Today I will present to you a futuristic love story and intense film from 2016 called Passengers. Beware, for a treasure trove of revelations awaits you. As this marks my inaugural video, your support is paramount. Get ready to buckle up as we recap the thrilling story that will transport you to the depths of space and the human heart. The intergalactic spacecraft Avalon is visible voyaging through the cosmos, en route to a colonized realm known as Homestead 2. All of its compartments are vacant, and the vessel operates on automatic control. The 258 crew members and the 5,000 passengers are in a state of suspended animation. Abruptly, the ship traverses a belt of meteors, which weakens its protective barriers. The primary shield receives redirected power, yet the ship hurtles toward a colossal asteroid, set for a collision. Without warning, the asteroid smashes into the spacecraft, causing numerous malfunctions. The ship initiates self-repairs, but one of the hibernation capsules activates. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer, is the awakened passenger. His capsule opens, and an automated system assists in his revival, informing him that he has spent 120 years in suspended animation, and the ship is a mere 4 months away from Homestead 2. He is informed that he can savor the luxurious amenities of the ship during that period. Jim receives instructions regarding his identification band, his living quarters, and the primary activities he must participate in before arriving on the planet. Excited and apprehensive about encountering fellow passengers, he prepares himself, departs from his living quarters, and enters an automated classroom designed for a collective learning experience. Jim appears slightly anxious as the hologram elucidates the state of affairs on Earth, depicting it as overcrowded, excessively priced, and overrated. He is instructed to reserve his questions until the end of the lesson, but Jim persistently queries why he is the sole attendee. He realizes that the hologram cannot provide answers and embarks on a search for other individuals. He arrives at the central concourse of the ship. Yet again, no one is present, but an automated information booth offers assistance. Jim requests to speak with a human and is directed to a steward, only to find that no one is present there as well. He then asks to communicate with the captain. Upon reaching the bridge, although he lacks authorization to enter, he observes that none of the main crew members are awake either. Ultimately, Jim heads to the observatory, where he discovers that the ship is actually 90 years away from Homestead 2. He realizes that he woke up prematurely and hastily returns to the concourse, sending a message back to Earth, seeking guidance on how to re-enter hibernation since he is unaware of the procedure. The communication system notifies him that the expensive call to Earth would take approximately 55 years to receive a response. Jim is devastated. He strolls around and discovers the ship's bar, where he encounters another individual. While conversing with the bartender, he notices something peculiar about him. When he goes to fetch him a beverage, Jim realizes that he's an android. Its name is Arthur. Jim desires to gather more information from him, but he cannot even elucidate to the android how it is feasible for him to be there ahead of time. Jim awakens in his cabin the following day and proceeds to the cantina, where he promptly realizes that most of the items on the menu are exclusively reserved for gold-class passengers. He acquires his simple coffee and attempts to ascertain how to repair his hibernation chamber. After procuring all the tools, he successfully gets it operational and reclines inside the pod. However, nothing transpires. Next, he resolves to employ the tools he discovered to gain access to the crew's hibernation chambers. That endeavor also proves futile. Minor malfunctions occur throughout the ship. Jim continues to frequent the bar for drinks, but primarily to converse with Arthur. The android imparts some advice that convinces him to infiltrate one of the gold-class rooms and attempt to enjoy himself on the ship. Jim samples all the restaurants, games, and the entertainment system. Yet as time elapses, he becomes even more despondent about being alone there. One day he becomes inebriated and wanders around the hibernation pods, inadvertently stumbling upon an airlock containing spacesuits tailored for spacewalks. Jim dons a suit and proceeds to the airlock, pushes a lever, and then presses the button to release the airlock door. Once outside the ship, he is captivated by the panorama. He is the sole conscious human being experiencing that instant in time. Jim disengages the magnets on his boots and floats in space, feeling devastated. He re-enters the ship, removes the suit but returns to the airlock without it. He pulls the lever, ready to terminate everything, but changes his mind at the last moment, hurries back inside and slips on a bottle. Jim stands up and is instantaneously drawn to a woman in one of the pods named Aurora. He searches for her files in the directory and listens to her passenger interview, becoming infatuated with her. Later, he is seen sitting beside her pod, still engrossed in her interviews. Back at the bar, he peruses some of her work and discusses her writing with Arthur. He becomes fixated on the irony of his situation, voyaging to another planet for a superior existence, awakening early, and discovering his perfect woman, only for her to be unattainable. Jim ruminates on her constantly and begins to contemplate awakening her as well. He deliberates with the android, but the android fails to comprehend the dilemma. If he rouses her for his own benefit, he would be abandoning her there with him, to perish on the ship. Jim initially decides against it, but as time elapses, he cannot let go of the idea, until one day he changes his mind. He goes to her pod and successfully activates it. As she awakens and goes through the same process he did, he conceals himself and returns to his room. A little while later, he proceeds to the main concourse, hoping to find her, and there she is, just as bewildered as he was a year ago. Jim informs her that they are the only ones awake and escorts her to the observatory. Then he divulges to her that he cannot access either the crew or the main commands of the ship. Aurora panics and desires to return to her pod. When they arrive, Jim clarifies that there is no specialized equipment on the vessel that can assist them in returning to hibernation, effectively conveying that they are marooned. They return to the main concourse and he advises her to rest, considering she just emerged from hibernation. She pities him, having endured over a year in solitude aboard the ship. Jim returns to the bar, feeling remorseful for his actions. He implores Arthur to refrain from disclosing that he was responsible for awakening Aurora. The following day, Aurora awakens. She returns to the main concourse and consults the automated information desk regarding the hibernation pods. Jim joins her there, and they proceed to have breakfast. As they depart, the information desk experiences a malfunction. In the cantina, Aurora realizes that Jim has been consuming the same breakfast for more than a year and arranges for him to receive one of the menus reserved for the gold-class passengers. They discuss the potential for repairing the pods, but unlike Jim, Aurora is not prepared to give up. She searches the infirmary, examines research documents, and ultimately arrives at the crew's hibernation quarters, attempting to force open the doors. Jim notices additional malfunctions throughout the ship. After a while, Aurora laments about her existence aboard the Avalon. She composes, engages in jogging around the ship, and swims in the pool, gradually becoming more cognizant of her predicament. She visits the eatery to conduct an interview with Jim, suspecting that his tale might be intriguing. She inquires about his reasons for migrating to the colony. Jim initially responds with corporate slogans but proceeds to elaborate, expressing his aspirations of becoming someone and building a life on the new world. Later, they find themselves in the observatory, and Aurora finally divulges her purpose for being there. Unlike the other passengers, she possesses a round-trip ticket. Her intention was to journey to Homestead 2, reside there for a year, and then return to Earth, becoming the first journalist to accomplish such a feat and penning the most extraordinary story ever told. Aurora gradually loses hope in finding a solution to their current predicament, while Jim devises a way to uplift her spirits. He takes her dancing, to the cinema, and to the basketball court. Lastly, he introduces her to Arthur at the bar. She relaxes momentarily until the reality of their situation dawns on her. Jim is left alone with the android, feeling remorseful for what he has done to her. In the next instance, he is seen tinkering with something, while Aurora enters the observatory and discovers a miniature replica of the Chrysler building he crafted for her. After a while, they embark on a bar date. They dine and share stories about their lives. She reveals that her father passed away during her teenage years. Following dinner, Jim escorts Aurora to the airlock, and they don their spacesuits. Together, they venture out for a spacewalk. Jim finally has someone to share that awe-inspiring experience with. Jim deactivates the magnets on their boots, and they float together in space. Upon returning inside, they share an immediate kiss, retreat to his cabin, and spend the night together. Soon after, they begin living as a couple. Aurora moves into his cabin and chronicles her life on the ship. They jog, dine, and sleep together. Jim explores the ship further and discovers the hydroponics bay. He presents Aurora with flowers. One day, the ship passes by a red giant, prompting them to visit the observatory for a glimpse. It happens to be Aurora's birthday, so they later celebrate in one of the numerous restaurants on the ship, followed by the bar. Jim briefly leaves to use the restroom and prepares the handmade ring for Aurora, while she converses with Arthur at the bar. Unbeknownst to him, the android reveals to Aurora that Jim intentionally woke her up, disregarding the need for secrecy. Suddenly, Jim returns, and Aurora confronts him in a state of absolute disbelief. Furious and panicked, she runs away. Jim returns to his cabin only to find all of her belongings gone. The following day, he encounters her in the eatery, but as soon as he speaks, she flees. Aurora feels desperate. One night, overcome by anger, she storms into Jim's cabin, delivering punches and kicks, consumed by a desire to end his life. Jim attempts to apologize and explain his actions to her over the communication system since she persistently avoids him. He confesses his love for her, but Aurora remains indifferent. She cannot forgive him for robbing her of her life. One night, while Jim is in his cabin, another malfunction occurs. The ship encounters a critical error, and the main command system shuts down. Later, he enters the elevator, which malfunctions. Aurora enters the main concourse and discovers that Jim has planted a tree there. Subsequently, she proceeds to the canteen, where the nourishment dispenser is also malfunctioning. Abruptly, both of them perceive the voice of the deck commander through the communications, inquiring about the individual who planted the tree. They both rush into the concourse and witness Gus Mancuso positioned before Jim's tree. They introduce themselves and inform the commander about the circumstance. He fails to comprehend how 3 capsules could malfunction. Mancuso escorts them to the control room, where he detects an anomaly with the spacecraft. However, the system's information must be manually examined. As they depart from the control room, an android nearly tumbles upon them, prompting them to inform Mancuso that malfunctions have been occurring more frequently throughout the ship. He asserts that such occurrences should not happen and demonstrates how to gather the data. Mancuso inspects the capsules, and Jim joins him there. He has unraveled the mystery behind Aurora's capsule. The deck commander deems Jim's actions reprehensible. Later, while scrutinizing the collected data at the control room, Mancuso is joined by Aurora. They discuss the incident involving her capsule, but he expresses his inability to rectify the situation. Jim arrives with the 16th defective android. Mancuso experiences the effects of hibernation sickness and retires to rest. However, as he departs, he coughs up blood. That night, Aurora struggles to sleep and decides to indulge in a swim. Suddenly, gravity is lost throughout the ship, and she begins to drown as the pool's water moves along with her. The gravity system resets, and she narrowly escapes alive. They coincidentally encounter each other while searching for Mancuso. The 3 of them reconvene at the control room, gradually uncovering the ship's predicament. Mancuso deduces that an event occurred 2 years ago, resulting in a major system failure. They must identify and repair the cause of the failure, as the entire ship is struggling to compensate. If left unresolved, the entire vessel will be left stranded. They embark on a quest to locate the problem, but Mancuso faints, prompting Jim and Aurora to transport him to the infirmary. Mancuso's condition is terminal, and there are no treatments to prolong his life. After some time, the 3 of them gather in the observatory, where Mancuso presents Jim with his identification bracelet, urging them to fix the ship before passing away. Suddenly, the lights shift to a distressing red, and the ship begins to tremble. Jim informs Aurora that he needs her assistance, and they sprint toward the engineering section, only to encounter another gravity drive failure. Immediately after, another failure afflicts Arthur as well. Jim deactivates the android. They eventually reach the engineering section and commence the search for the problem. They discover it within the power plant, and as they open the hatch, Aurora gets pulled in due to a breach in the hull caused by an asteroid impact. Jim also gets pulled, but he manages to hold onto the hatch as it closes on him. Eventually, he too gets pulled in, but they swiftly seal the breach. Upon fixing that issue, Jim realizes that there are multiple breaches in the hull. They trace the meteor's trajectory and find that it struck the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can find replacement parts for it. They locate the component and replace it, but the process of venting the reactor continues to fail. They attempt to do it manually, but it fails again. Jim realizes that he must open the vent door from outside the ship to cool down the reactor. Both of them head to the airlock, and as Jim prepares to go out, he entrusts Aurora with Mancuso's bracelet, acknowledging that he might not return. She assists him with the suit, and as he steps into the airlock, she implores him to come back, as she cannot bear to live on the ship without him. Aurora returns to the reactor room, where the temperature reaches critical levels. A bolt from the reactor strikes her arm, while Jim, outside the ship, approaches the vent and sees the door. The temperature continues to rise in the reactor room as he attempts to bypass the vent door to open it. He realizes that he must manually hold the door open for the reactor to vent and informs Aurora. She disapproves of the plan, but he proceeds with it, insisting that they must save the other people. Aurora reluctantly vents the reactor. The process proves successful, but the reactor fumes push Jim away and break his tether. The pressure in his suit begins to drop. He informs Aurora of what happened, and she swiftly moves to another suit to retrieve him. He apologizes to her once again. She dons a suit and ventures out to rescue him, but her tether is too short. She's pulled back, but she manages to grab onto his tether and successfully pulls him in. Aurora drags Jim into the infirmary, only to discover that he has already succumbed. She employs Mancuso's bracelet to override the medical protocols and revive him using the medical pod. The medical pod performs its task automatically and restores Jim's life. Aurora forgives him. Later, Aurora repairs Arthur, and they conduct a proper space burial for Mancuso. Jim escorts her to the infirmary and informs her that he has found a way to utilize the medical pod as a hibernation pod. He urges her to enter the pod and complete the remainder of the journey in hibernation. However, as subsequently revealed, she declines the offer and chooses to stay awake on the ship with him. Jim finally proposes to her, and they spend the rest of their lives together on the ship. 88 years later, the Avalon arrives at Homestead 2. The crew awakens to find the ship in an incredibly unexpected state. Aurora leaves them a message, recounting the story of her and Jim's life on the ship while the others were in hibernation. Congratulations! You are now officially a certified viewer of my channel. Slow clap for you, my friend. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can enjoy more content like this.